My name is Abhijit Singh, and I am a senior fellow here. I head the Maritime Policy Initiative. Uh, as I start, I would, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. On the past 2, 3 occasions that we've discussed maritime, there's been a fair bit of interest. But I'm very happy to see that as we are growing, we have more number of people participating in our events, and that's very encouraging. Today's event, as I said, is on maritime issues, and the question that we have asked is about the expanding contour of India's maritime security interests. And we are saying that if India is now exercising its having engagements in the South China Sea, as also in the Western Indian Ocean, we now have ships that are going across to the Atlantic also and doing anti-piracy operations with EU ships in the Gulf of Guinea. So we are posing the question, is the perimeter of our interests expanding? And do we have the capability to stretch ourselves in all of these directions? We have an excellent panel today to debate this question. I'd like to briefly introduce them. Admiral Sunil Lanba, he's the former Chief of Naval Staff, a very seasoned voice on matters maritime, has seen the shifts in policy happen firsthand. So I'll be going to Admiral Lanba first. Second will be Pratnishri Basu. She's a analyst with us in ORF Calcutta, has looked very closely at South China Sea issues and littoral Southeast Asia. So I'll be coming over to you, Pratnishri, next. And Manu Pabi, very well known, he's senior editor at Economic Times, writes frequently on defense issues, but has also written a fair bit on India's maritime modernization. So you'll go third. But I'm going to come to you first, Admiral Lanba. Sir, I'd like to sort of pose this question to you that there is the sense that we have a more robust maritime posture in that we are doing much more than we used to, both in maritime Southeast Asia as also in the Western Indian Ocean. But does that have implications for naval policy, for maritime strategy, capability, etc.? How do you, as someone that's been at the forefront of naval policy and naval strategy, how do you assess India's political stance, at least on matters maritime? You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Abhijit. It's an interesting topic, Indo-Pacific. What are the challenges and what have we been doing over the past decade or so, and what we need to do when we look ahead? I'll first talk a little bit about the Indian Ocean region and then go on to the larger Indo-Pacific. As we all know that the Indian Ocean is the third largest ocean in the world, and nations along its periphery and hinterland account for 35% of global population and has some of the fastest growing economies in the world. And Indian Ocean, as part of the larger Indo-Pacific, has emerged as the significant drivers for global growth. Also, the international sea lanes in the IOR and 2/3 of all global oil shipment, 50% of container traffic, and a bulk of the bulk cargoes traverse through the sea lines of communications in the Indian Ocean region. And our central position in the IOR astride these important sea lanes of the world give us immense strategic advantage. It facilitates reach, sustenance, mobility of our maritime forces, thereby giving us ability to effectively influence this maritime space. While this geography affords us the opportunity to harness the seas to our advantage, it also places us the very center of the strategic churn which is going or taking place in the larger Indo-Pacific. And the impact on us in the future will determine what is our outlook and the choices we adopt today. There's an old adage among sailors that while borders divide, the seas connect. So the navies across the world, we endeavor to build partnerships, mutual trust, and confidence among friendly foreign countries. And in the contemporary geostrategic space or landscape, the Indian Navy provides initiatives, the initiatives we have taken over the past decade, provides us sufficient tools to the Indian policy establishment to take steps forward in the larger Indo-Pacific. While we are all aware of the ongoing contest for influence in our region, extra-regional countries, particularly China, have used the combination of economic, diplomatic, cultural, and military tools to gain advantage in the Indo-Pacific. I'm talking about the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific in particular. Growing regional military presence coupled with overseas bases, dual-use maritime infrastructure will not only allow Beijing to influence vital sea lanes of the Indo-Pacific. At about 375 platforms, numerically, the Chinese Navy is the largest. They have the largest Coast Guard in the world, the largest maritime militia, the largest fishing fleet, the largest merchant marine fleet. They have 42% of the shipbuilding capacity of merchant ships. And in the last 5 years, they have added over 80 platforms to the Chinese Navy, which is combined more than the next 10 large navies put together. So at any given year, they are adding an average of 10 new platforms, out of which 4 to 5 are destroyers, frigates, and support ships, which are blue water forces, including the third aircraft carrier now undergoing sea trials. So it's a formidable force and capability which they are building. It also gives them the ability to interfere with our interests. And cognizant of these changing dynamics, the government and the Navy have accorded high priority to maritime security in bilateral relations and have stepped up effort to build a stronger network in the Indo-Pacific. There has been a shift to look at maritime issues in the past decade from a purely continental outlook that we had earlier. And our engagements in the larger Indo-Pacific can be broadly divided under four categories, namely capacity building, capability enhancement, cooperative engagement, and collaborative efforts. And we have constructively engaged with nations in the Indo-Pacific to take these forward to build and enhance the capacities and capabilities. For any operations at sea, is determined and dependent largely on maritime domain awareness. You need to know what is happening on the ocean, above the ocean, and under the water. And to develop comprehensive maritime domain awareness, the Navy regularly patrols the far reaches of the Indian Ocean region by mission deployed ships, the long range maritime patrol aircraft, the Boeing P-8I, also the Sea Guardian UAVs that we have, and monitor it by satellites. The Navy has also set up coastal navigation surveillance chains for island nations in the IOR, that is Sri Lanka, Maldives, Seychelles, Mauritius. We have set up the International Fusion Center for the IOR in Gurugram. We have signed exchange agreements, especially for white shipping, with over 20 countries, which include, to name a few, Vietnam, Japan, Singapore, Australia. We are part of the International Fusion Center in Singapore. We have had a liaison officer there for over 2 decades. And at the IOR, IFC IOR in Gurugram, they are now international officers also based in that. So these inputs are correlated and the maritime domain awareness is shared with our partners. And this is also one of the focus areas of the Quad, and in the statement put out after the foreign ministers meeting in Japan a month ago, this was also mentioned about comprehensive maritime domain awareness in the larger Indo-Pacific. We also extended our reach by bilateral logistic treaties, operational turnaround facilities, and ports. We have built maritime infrastructure. Exercise make a large component, The most famous and talked about is Malabar, which is now all the Quad partners are part of Malabar. But our oldest bilateral exercise, which has been now going on for over 30 years, is with Singapore. There also been greater engagement with Vietnam, at least maybe once, at least twice a year, a ship makes a port call in Vietnam, and there have been other engagements which I'll cover slightly later in my talk. Philippines is also a focus area. We have supplied them with BrahMos. A ship recently visited Manila post return from the RIMPAC exercises. So there has been a greater engagement. The number of bilateral, multilateral, tri-services exercises have grown by leaps and bounds over the years. In the Bay of Bengal, we carry out coordinated patrols along the maritime borders with Bangladesh, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Thailand. And we carry out EEZ surveillance of island nations of Mauritius, Seychelles, and Maldives as they lack the capacity to patrol the EEZ. Training also makes a key component where we train over 900 personnel. For example, when Vietnam acquired the Kilo class submarine from Russia, we trained 6 sets of crews for them. Also, over the years, we have supported Vietnam by sending technical teams for repair and maintenance of the Russian platform which they have in the navies. And we've done this for maybe now over 15, 20 years, which has taken place. We've given a submarine, a Kilo class submarine on lease to Myanmar. We also have a team which is there helping them to operate this boat. We send mobile teams for training to a number of countries. So this also makes an important engagement tool. Hydrographics is also one thing where we have agreements and a number of island nations we've carried out hydrographic surveys. And lastly, we continue to support multilateral initiatives such as IONS, which has now been close to 15 years in the making. But all these initiatives which we have taken need to be backed by hard power if we have to be counted in the Indo-Pacific region. We need to invest more in military capability, especially in maritime capability. We need to have a larger force of blue water platforms. Now I'm talking about destroyers, frigates, nuclear powered submarines. I'm not talking of the SSBNs, I'm talking of the SSNs, third aircraft carrier with the air wings. If you need to be counted among nations in the Indo-Pacific. And as our stake rise in global affairs, we'll need to shoulder greater responsibilities in the IOR. I think I'll stop here, and when you have the interaction, we can take up more issues. We can talk about AUKUS and all others. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that very comprehensive perspective. Before I go to Pratyushree, sir, I have a question for you. And that is to do actually with China, which really seems to be the driving logic for most of what we are doing in the Indo-Pacific region. There is this perceived China threat. And the Chinese, as you rightly mentioned, are modernizing, but they're also growing their presence both in the Western Pacific as well as the Indian Ocean region. My question to you would be, sir, that do you see that that balance of power argument to say that we've got to somehow push back China, that doesn't fully comport with the operational logic of being a very proactive player in the South China Sea, perhaps, or in the Western Pacific, because the countries in that region do have some reservations against extra-regional powers, robustly projecting power in that region. So do you think there might be a bit of a sort of dichotomy there, or maybe a contradiction of sorts, in that the political logic for us to push back China is fine, but operationally we've got to be careful about what we do in the South China Sea, because really our sphere of interest and a sphere of influence is the Indian Ocean. This is an argument that we often hear from maritime analysts, but what's your take on this, sir?
I agree with you. Our primary focus areas is the Indian Ocean region. And being the largest navy in the IOR, we have the capabilities to monitor and the IOR and take operational action if the need arises. I mean, you're looking at the South China Sea and the Western Pacific. We don't have the deployed in the South China Sea, nor will the littoral countries of the South China Sea would be very forthcoming for the permanent presence of Indian naval platforms. But we, as a nation, as a maritime force, we need to provide alternatives and engagements to countries of the Western Pacific and IOR, and that is what we have been doing. By say, let's take the specific case of Vietnam. They have economic dependency and relationship with China. They have a maritime disputes over the islands in the South China Sea. They go about resolving their issues in the South China Sea more quietly than what Philippines does. Philippines is more vocal about their pushback. Vietnam does it more quietly. But over the years, we have supported Vietnam. We have provided them capabilities and capacities in a number of avenues. Like I talked about the submarine crew, which we have trained, supported maintenance and upkeep of their Russian platforms. And along with Quad partners, we need to provide an alternative and pushback so that the UNCLOS is followed in letters and spirit. And I think that is a role India and the Indian Navy will need to play in the larger Indo-Pacific, especially in the South China Sea.
Pratneshwari, can I ask you to make your remarks, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'll talk briefly about, from a geopolitical perspective, the shifts that have taken place in India's maritime strategy. And we've seen how over the past decade, roughly, there has been a significantly heightened interest in the country's focus on maritime matters, which has reflected a shift in its foreign policy and defense posture. And the country has done so by recognizing the geographical advantages that the peninsularship of our country has, and it has leveraged this position to enhance maritime connections and security networks across the Indian Ocean region. And this shift is also evident in India's efforts to provide public goods in the maritime sphere, which includes assisting, as Admiral Lanba also pointed out, smaller littoral nations with managing their exclusive economic zones, responding to natural disasters, and so on. And India has cultivated steady and strategic relationships with key partners in the IOR, underpinned by initiatives like the Sagar Initiative and Maritime Vision 2030. And now India's maritime policy has evolved across multiple sectors, from infrastructure development to foreign policy outreach to, of course, strengthened maritime defense collaborations. And I think that there are four key elements that inform this approach. One is historical and societal factors. The second is, of course, the maritime geography of the region. The third is the political geography that defines the approaches that all these countries, including India, undertake. And of course, lastly, the China factor. And India's strategy has evolved currently to becoming a much more comprehensive one than it was previously. And it aims to address threats that arise both from and within the sea, preserving regional stability, supporting the diaspora in other countries, developing a blue economy, and maintaining a geostrategic maritime position that is favorable to the country. And the Indian Navy has also gradually deepened its engagements with Southeast Asian nations. It has fostered robust security cooperation and emphasized regional partnerships even for non-military issues. We can see this approach as it was formalized in the 2015 Naval Doctrine, which acknowledged the importance of the Indo-Pacific concept and its implications for India's maritime security. And this marked a shift from the previous focus on the the previous focus being on the Indian Ocean to one that now looks at broader acknowledgement of the developments in the wider Indo-Pacific region, including, for instance, the Red Sea, Gulf of Oman, Gulf of Aden, and also Southeast Asia to the east, all of which are crucial to the country's maritime strategy. In all of this, of course, a major transformation has also taken place in the change from the earlier look east to the act east policy, which has marked a more strategic and more proactive engagement of India with the Indo-Pacific. The act east policy emphasizes not only economic integration, but also strategic partnerships and expanded security cooperation, particularly in the Southeast Asian region with Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. And India has bolstered its capacities through forward positioning, mission-based deployments, reinforced maritime domain awareness initiatives, and of course, the development of deep water maritime facilities. There are certain challenges, however, although all of these challenges that I'll be mentioning are in different stages of being worked upon by the country. So, for instance, India's deepening engagement in the maritime domain faces both operational and policy-related challenges, which has already been mentioned previously. And while the peninsular geography of the country offers strategic advantages, it also presents vulnerabilities, particularly with respect to balancing blue water and brown water naval responsibilities. Mission-based deployments also do sometimes risk overstretching the Navy, potentially leading to perhaps unsustainable operations. But as I mentioned, that these are all being worked upon, and there are efforts being deployed to sustain these initiatives. And for many years also, India's maritime ambitions have been constrained by persistently low budgetary allocations to the Navy, which again is another thing that has been changing over the years. We've seen an increase in this. Capacity constraints in India's shipyards also strain the Navy's limited resources. And to overcome these, India must deepen its defense collaborations, expand its diplomatic engagements, and invest more in boosting its shipping and maritime trade. And finally, the Indo-Pacific region itself, of course, is significantly influenced by China's expanding presence. And it poses perhaps the most challenging yet promising aspect of India's maritime engagements. China's inroads through political engagements, through port investments, through military activities have all created a sort of a competition continuum that is just short of a full-blown conflict. And I think in response, India must extend its operational reach beyond the IOR, and it can also leverage the several minilateral platforms, including, of course, the Quad and other bilateral partnerships that it has with countries in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratnishri. Before I go to Manu, I have one question for you too. Pratnishri, you've looked closely at maritime security affairs in Southeast Asia and the South China Sea. What's your sense of how countries in Southeast Asia look at India's bolstered maritime posture? We believe it's bolstered, but do they think it's bolstered? And also relatedly, we have very clearly been focusing on capacity building in Southeast Asia and defense trade. The Admiral mentioned the BrahMos, Tejas, etc. We're trying to increase our defense trade in that region. But is there a logic for India to do much more militarily in the South China Sea? Other than the Philippines, at least I don't know of too many other countries in Southeast Asia that want what they call, what they see as extra-regional powers having much of presence in the region. But what's your sense as someone that looks at Southeast Asia? What do you think that they would welcome India to play a more engaged military role in that region, or do you think that it's going to be much of what we've seen in the past?
I personally think that there has been a change actually in how the Southeast Asian nations perceive presence of any extra-regional power within their waters, if I can put it that way, and that includes India also. There was much a more cautionary approach earlier, but that has been gradually changing as the countries in this region, in the Southeast Asian region, also become more and more cautious about China themselves, and they have also become increasingly more vocal about China's advances. We've seen Vietnam becoming increasingly vocal. We've also seen countries who have been traditionally not inclined to comment or not inclined to take any position, such as Malaysia and Indonesia, also speak up at various points in time. With Philippines, of course, it's a bit different because the Philippines is a treaty ally of the US, and they have they have a backing in that respect. And we've seen how throughout 2023, Chinese, and it continues to date, China and Philippine navies have clashed repeatedly and very regularly in the West Philippine Sea region. But coming back to how these countries approach India and increase in India's military presence in the region, I think that while India has to tread carefully, it will not be met with a great degree of resistance, because we've also seen how I think it was in May earlier this year that India sent 3 warships to Singapore, to Malaysia, and to Vietnam. And all, the response and the reaction of all these countries was actually a positive one. They welcomed the presence of the Indian Navy in their waters. And while maybe these cannot happen at very frequently, I think that India should gradually start to build a presence militarily in these waters. And of course, but that has to also be coupled with the non-military engagements as well.
Actually, that's very helpful. Manu, I'm going to come to you. And I know that you've done a lot of work on modernization, and perhaps that's one of the things that you'd like to touch upon. But also this point that Pratinshri ended with, non-traditional security. Why is it that, I mean, in your comments, if you could also address the reason why we are so focused on the traditional security challenges, wherein the real demand for security seems to be actually coming from non-traditional security. A lot of these countries actually do want to do much more with us when it comes to, trafficking and overfishing and pollution, etc. So, HADR, etc. So, I mean, the military modernization that you talk about also, at least this is the sense that a lot of us in the room have, that caters to the traditional security challenges. But isn't non-traditional security also a thing that we should be talking about? You have the floor.
And, a lot of it has been covered already, but I'll just give my brief understanding of the situation. To start with, what is India's key interest in the Indo-Pacific? I think politically speaking, it is peace and security, basically for economic prosperity. I think the Indian position is very clear that we want this region to be peaceful so that everyone can have an equitable growth economically. And a lot of poverty exists in the region and people have to come out of it. And an international peace, rules-based order is the best way to go about it. And the challenge we see in this approach of ours to the Indo-Pacific is it's the Chinese and how they are behaving, their own disregard of international norms, the misinterpretation of laws, and their rapidly expansionist approach is, I think, bringing this region to one of its most worst security scenarios in the past 40, 50 years. What happens in the Indo-Pacific has a very clear and direct linkage to India's land borders as well. And unfortunately, India has been sea blind for many decades. It's been changing for the past few decades, but we've always been land focused. And if we had paid more attention in the past to what Chinese approach was in the South China Sea, we could have perhaps prepared better for Ladakh. It is a similar model. You're using your infrastructural might on increasing, or to impose a boundary change, a change which is against what is internationally perceived to be right. And in a sense, coerce a neighbor with disproportionate power and then try to negotiate territory from a position of influence. And that's what they tried to do in Ladakh for us. And we've shown a little bit how to work on that. Like, you stand up against the bully, you stand your ground, and they do back off. So how's India countering this growing challenge that China is posing to us? In my opinion, we're doing it through partnerships. It's been spoken about before with the Quad initiative and with our bilateral and trilateral partnerships in the region. We are very uniquely placed for that because we are a pretty acceptable country to most of the Indo-Pacific partners. There's not too much legacy there, so we have kind of a fresh start with many of the countries. I think the Quad partnership is the most exciting, where you're pooling resources to ensure that you have domain awareness where 4 countries can come together. I'm very happy to note that the Maritime Domain Awareness Partnership, the IPMDA, is going to be signed, has been signed, but the enabling agreement will be signed for the Hawkeye 360 in the next week or so. And we are also going to be acquiring the MQ-9B drones. And commonality of platforms like the P8Is ensures that we can exchange information at a very rapid and fast basis. Like mentioned before, that India's approach is to build capacity of like-minded nations in the Indo-Pacific. I find the Philippines-BrahMos deal particularly fascinating because just look at what it is. It is an Indo-Russian system sold to Philippines, which has a American partnership in the past, whose biggest enemy is the Chinese. There was some trouble in this deal initially because the Russians were not too happy with that because they consider China as a friend, but all those things were, smoothened over. Just an example of how India can be acceptable supplier of weapons to third nations here, even in partnership, with, say, Russia, or, for example, if you do have to offer the LCA to any people in the region, it will be in partnership with the Americans because the engine is American. I think we have done a lot in the past 10 years, and the biggest change, which I was personally very happy to see, was our decision to stop our approach that we will not do lethal weapons exports in 2014. Before that, we had a very clear policy. We will only sell non-lethal defensive weapon systems. And the result of that was China became the biggest supplier of all our neighbors, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Myanmar, even Sri Lanka. And it will take us some time to overturn that, but I think we need to focus more there. On the question of resources, that's what I want to address also. Currently, like the Admiral also said, we have the capacity to influence the Indian Ocean region quite decently. Perhaps the emerging challenges will make it more difficult. We are seeing more areas getting activated in the IOR itself. But beyond that, I think we are severely limited by a resource crunch. Now, this is a question, whenever you ask a question as a journalist, will ask the question to the government or even to bureaucrats, they will always say there's no resource crunch. You go to parliament records, you go to debates, press conferences, everyone says whatever the Navy wants, we will give them. And there is no resource crunch. But this, unfortunately, is not the truth. Whenever there is a requirement from the Navy, and the government does not have money for it, they just put it into this bureaucratic black box, saying, okay, we'll have a committee to decide. For example, the Navy has been wanting a third aircraft carrier. They publicly stated this for the past 7 years, 6 years, more strongly over the past 3 years. There's been no movement on that. And they will never tell you this, but it is because at the end, it all comes down to money. Unfortunately, while our focus on partnerships has increased, in the past 10 years, the budget for the defense forces has been steadily coming down. We're now at about 1.8, 1.9% of the GDP, which the number itself is good. It is not adequate, in my opinion, to cater for our disturbed neighborhood. And over the past 10 years, for example, the Navy got 32% of the modernization budget of the armed forces. As its role increases, I think this number has to go up. Air Force had the maximum share at 45%. Air Force is still bigger in terms of personnel than the Indian Navy. And seeing our maritime responsibilities, I think, is a huge case to increase both personnel and platforms. Other examples where resource crunches come into capacity building is our project to buy new landing platform docks, LPDs. That program has been stuck for a decade. Fleet support vessels are essential to send ships to South China Sea or further away. They took a decade to be signed up. We already spoke about the aircraft carrier. The nuclear boats are still not signed, still not cleared, the SSNs. And again, I would suspect resource constraints are behind that. On the positive side, a lot of good initiatives that have been done in the past 6-7 years are promoting startups and schemes like the IDEX, bringing innovation to get over this resource crunch, having innovative approaches to meet challenges which have not been met in the past, which includes non-traditional security. And I think in the future we need to spend much more on these innovations. We have to increase IDEX by 10x or 100x, bring in more money there. We also need to utilize the capacity of our shipyards. Indian shipyards are severely underutilized right now. At today's date, L&T, the shipyard is empty. A lot of our state-run PSU shipyards are empty. We have, at one hand, empty shipyards and capacity to produce, on the other hand, partners or countries in Southeast Asia who need those platforms. In between, the bridge of who funds them has to be figured out. And I think if we can spend more money on capacity building in our neighborhood, that could be the way to go. That's my view for now.
No, Manu, you made some excellent points. And I think on this matter of capacity crunch that you say, the shortage of resources, I think that calls for a little more discussion in the room. What I would like to just add a little perspective to what Manu has said before I sort of throw this open for the audience, and please feel free to shoot your questions at the panelists. But this question of resources is very important. So on the one hand, there is the need for us to have aspiration, not just in the Indian Ocean, but in the larger Indo-Pacific, because peacetime maritime security is also about perception management. It's also about psychologically dominating your perceived adversaries. So you need to have presence in their backwaters. So if the South China Sea is a Chinese lake, we obviously need some presence in Southeast Asia. That logic is sound. But when you don't have maritime capacity, you stretch yourself thin. And the way that a lot of maritime analysts, I suppose, look at maritime security, the Admiral is here. I'd like to hear his perspective on this. But is that these are three concentric circles. There's littoral security or coastal security. There's near sea security, and then there's far seas. And if you're not adding capacity, essentially what you're doing is that you're distributing your resources in all of the three. When what you really need is to have more resources on your coastal and your near seas and less in the far seas. But when you don't produce in more capacity, you stretch yourself thin. So, I mean, I would agree with you on that point. But I'm going to now throw the floor open. But, sir, can I just come to you with my first question? And as you put your thoughts together, there is this narrative, sir, about the Quad. And we've pretty much heard, all of the three of you panelists mention the Quad. And Quad, to be honest, was actually the logic for doing this roundtable, because we sort of thought that if there's been a statement made at the foreign ministers meet in Tokyo that calling out Chinese aggression and China's assertiveness in the South China Sea, then definitely there's something to it that needs to be discussed. But this whole narrative of the Quad being a force for good, the Quad being a sort of bulwark against China, is this sustainable over a long term? Because it seems to sort of upend the logic of the Quad, which is that it's basically a consultative forum. And it comes up with options for regional countries, development, creating connectivity on technology, on climate change, and a number of other areas. But if we militarize the Quad, could it be counterproductive in the long run? Your view on this, sir?
Among the Quad members, we are the only country which has a common land border with China, which is disputed. Okay. All the four members of the Quad are economically linked with China, whether you want to call it as suppliers, importers, across the spectrum. Even India's trade with China has gone up despite Galwan and the ban which were put in this for a whole lot of issues. So in my view, I think we are a very long way from Quad having a military segment or an element to it. I think the biggest naysayers in all this would be us only, because we have a very different security challenge vis-a-vis China than the other three members of the Quad. So at the moment, what the Quad has been trying to do is you have come together to push back, see that you have a free and open rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific, and they have identified a number of non-military avenues which can be used to focus and get cooperation amongst the nations of the Western Pacific and the island countries in the Pacific. And that is how the Quad is going to go ahead in the foreseeable future. That is my opinion. I don't think so there is going to be a military element to the Quad. There has been, in the dialogue which took place with the United States in the past, there was a suggestion made from their side of having a joint patrol in the South China Sea, which was a complete no-no for India. Okay. We are not going to do that. You are just poking the dragon in the eye over that issue. So this is how the Quad is going to develop. We're going to give avenues. We're going to talk of free and open this thing. But I don't think so there is going to be a military element understanding maritime force or coordination and all that for the foreseeable.
Right. Thank you, sir. That's very helpful. The floor is now open for comments and questions. Please, if there's anyone. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Colonel Vidur Sharma, sir. I am a serving Indian Army officer, currently a visiting research fellow with the ORF. My question is to Admiral Lanba, sir. Sir, there is a lot of guesswork with respect to the Chinese probable invasion or the occupation of Taiwan, where people are saying there's likelihood by 2027 or different timelines are being given. And one of the reason that has been stated by many experts is that the China is yet not ready to undertake the complex amphibious operations which are required to take over an island territory like Taiwan. It's quite large. So I just want to know your views on that with respect to the Chinese capability in case required to take over militarily because of this amphibious operations complexity involved. And the second is with respect to the lots of feeling of regret with respect to Indian inaction when the China occupied Tibet in 1950. A lot of people who suggest that India should have done this and that and whatever things, and the multiple regions are there, but we still regrets, and the repercussion of Chinese occupation of Tibet is still being faced by us. Now, the second question is with respect to the Taiwan contingency. Now, do you envisage any military role, especially the naval role, Indian naval role in a contingency where the China invades Taiwan? It may not be direct military support. There are multiple things which can be done, especially in a situation when the China is not respecting the Indian security interest, whether it is support to the Pakistan or you know about all these things. They are openly supporting our insurgents in the northeast or supporting the anti-Indian forces all along our periphery in our neighborhood. So they are not respecting that, they are not reciprocating that feeling of friendship what we normally say, and it has been done. So your view on that, do we envisage any military role? If yes, what could be that?
Just take one or two more questions, and then we'll go to the panelists. So, yeah, at the back there, I just saw your hand. Yes, please. The question was that there are a number of accidents that the Navy has had to face up in the recent few months, perhaps few years, and is that bad for our reputation as a blue water Navy? That's essentially the question. But I'll take one or two questions more, and then, yes, please.
Good evening, Admiral Lanba. My name is Rajas. I'm presently a LAM fellow. My question is regarding as we expand our maritime interests beyond the Indian Ocean, when we look at our maritime security from a coastal standpoint, our Coast Guard plays a significant role when it comes to protecting our immediate borders. But our Coast Guard has been significantly underfunded in terms of recruitment and also in terms of infrastructure for many years now. So as India seeks to expand our borders for our Navy, what do you think should be the focus for the Coast Guard? Because it appears that we will be placing a greater burden on them for our more local domestic security issues.
The question that I would like both Admiral Lamba and you, Manu, to comment on the state of the Coast Guard. The fact that a lot of the maritime security discussion revolves around the Navy, and perhaps the Coast Guard should get more importance than it does because it is increasingly playing a bigger role in the national security matrix. So that's a very valid question. Yes, sir. One.
Admiral Lamba, sir, my question is regarding recent statement by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina about Saint Martin Island. He said it was to be taken by USA. She refused it, and that's why it happened. So, do you think it has its implication with the Indian Ocean, also India? How India is going to react it? Thank you.
So my question may not be as technically nuanced as everyone else, but my question was particular to Mr. Manu, which is, do you think we can use soft power in influencing, for soft power in the sense journalism, in influencing a stronger voice or influence in maritime affairs in Southeast Asia?
Shri, I would like you to give your views on the Taiwan question, because you look at that area, and what's your sense of what's happening between the US and China on Taiwan? And also, what are China's real options there? Vidar has asked a very, very good question. We here in India don't seem to give enough emphasis on that dimension of maritime security, but we'll hear. But a lot of questions were addressed to you, Admiral, so I will come to you, sir, first. You can start with the Taiwan question, then the accidents that have been happening, Coast Guard, Saint Martin Island. So 4 questions actually for you.
Okay, thanks. As for the Taiwan question, I think an amphibious invasion across the Taiwanese Strait or any large-scale amphibious operation is one of the most complex military operations any nation can undertake. And in my personal opinion, this is all bluster. I don't think so. Amphibious invasion across the Taiwanese Strait, as long as Taiwan doesn't declare itself to be independent. And this thing of 2027 and Xi Jinping and all that, the probability of it happening is very low. The cost of failure and loss of face to the Chinese or the PLA Navy and the Chinese military establishment and the CCP is too high, and the risk too high for them to undertake an operation like this. Okay. And it's not, I don't think so it's going to happen in the near future. They may talk, they may carry out violations of the airspace, and number of flights across have been increasing over the years and all that. That will go on, but I don't think so there is going to be a physical invasion across the Taiwanese Strait to overtake Taiwan. That's not going to happen. I think the issue of Tibet was also raised. I think it's too late to regret its history now. Okay, so there's no point lamenting over it. Tibet is a part of China. China is going to remain so. There's also what military role will India can play in case there's an invasion across the Taiwanese Strait? The blunt answer is we have no role to play, and I don't think so. We have the capability and capacity in the near future to play any role in that conflict across the states, and I don't think so. The Indian government or the security establishment will initiate any action across the land border to draw out forces or this thing. Very unlikely in my listing. I'll come to the Coast Guard. I'll take on the issue of accidents last. Post the terrorist incidents in Mumbai in 2009, there has been a great deal of focus on expansion of capability and capacity of the Coast Guard. There has been a setup of AI chain right across coastline, including setting up a radar chain which monitors the entire coast. The number of Coast Guard stations have gone up over the years ashore. Their capability in force buildup has also taken place, including in aviation platforms. So overall, the capability and capacity to monitor the inland waters of the Coast Guard has increased over the years. Also, coordination for coastal security issues between maritime agencies is also much better today than what it was over a decade ago. Budget is limited across whether it's for the defense forces or the Coast Guard. Should we invest more in maritime capability in the Indian Navy and Coast Guard? The answer is a definite yes. But the government of India needs to find that money and invest in it. St. Martin's Island, I don't know. It's a political issue. Means I don't know whether what Sheikh Hasina said is true or not, and whether there was the American issue of getting St. Martin's Island to set up an airstrip or an air base there. I really don't know what is behind it. They have a base in Diego Garcia where the long-range aircraft operate from. And this is the first time I have heard that they were looking for some facilities in the northern part of the Bay of Bengal. The last issue of accidents in the Navy. There have been accidents in the Navy, there's no denying that. But being a large Navy, our accident rates are in line with any Navy of this size. Okay. A ship is a dangerous environment and platform where you mix explosive, highly inflammable material on board. And in case standard operating procedures are not followed by the crew remarkably well over the years, and overall, when you analyze our accident rates with other large navies, I think we are much better off than it. What should we do to prevent accidents? I think there need to be greater focus on operations of standard operating procedures, checklists, and all that, so that these don't take place and happen. And in case they do take place, then we should be able to for the crew to be able to fight, say, like the case of the fire on Brahmaputra. I can say they did a remarkable job in putting out the fire, but then there was an issue of stability, a lack of stability in the ship when it toppled over and landed up on our side. So there needs to be a focus on standard operating procedures to prevent any accidents taking place, and there means a need to focus on training and morale. Okay. Thank you.
So that's very interesting. Particularly the point that you made about the hazardous conditions on a ship, and there's a number of naval officers who wrote about this reality at the time that the accident that you mentioned happened. And this is something you definitely got to consider, that navies around the world have accidents. It's something that you've got to live with, and that's because in a little space, you're all cramped up. There's ammunition, there's fuel, there's everything. Admiral makes a very good point about the fact that we've got to somehow ensure that we have the SOPs, the protocols build up, that we reduce the accidents. But you can never come to a position where you're having no accidents at all. Accidents are a part of life when you're in a force like the Navy or perhaps the Air Force. But I'm going to come to you, Pratnishri, and I'm going to ask you to please comment on the Taiwan issue. What are your thoughts about what's happening between the US and China? And also, do you think that the Indian Navy perhaps will ever play a role in what's happening in that region?
Thank you for the question. I would agree with Admiral Lanba in the fact that not in the near future. Is there a possibility of the Taiwan contingency actually playing out? But having said that, Chinese gray zone tactics or salami slicing strategies, however one likes to put it, that will of course continue, and in all likelihood China may even step up the frequency of its activities. We've seen the same in the South China Sea. It can happen in the Taiwan Strait as well. There was in fact another recent incident, I forget in which month, but of a Chinese vessel coming very close to another Taiwanese vessel near the Taiping Island. So these kind of incidents will likely continue, and China is going to constantly try to use its gray zone tactics to establish its claim, as it has been doing for many years. But in all of this, again, I would say that, of course, India's role is very limited. Perhaps what India may do, if instances of gray zone tactics increase, is that India can bolster its security along its northern borders. Because, as of course Admiral again pointed out earlier, that of course we are the only country that shares a land border with China, and a long land border at that. And of course, other than precautionary measures of being ready, strengthening its positions and so on, I don't think that there would be a greater role that the Navy can play.
First, I want to take on the question on accidents. Yes, there have been accidents, and we have been writing about them a lot. And they do, show, they do sometimes create a negative impression. But the good thing is, in India, you can write about accidents. Sir said there's no accident-free Navy, sir. So the Chinese Navy is accident-free. They don't acknowledge an accident. So at least we're having debate here. We talk about accidents, and the corrective measures are taken. And a lot of accidents which happened in 2013-14 were because we had upscaled tempo of operations post-2008. And I think it's good that we talk and write about these accidents, and I see corrective actions taking place. So that's to put the... Yeah, so I think this is more of an exception than the norm, because 2013-14 was a series of about 15 accidents which happened. This is we still to see. Hope they're not repeated here. On the Coast Guard question, I think there's a huge case for it to be. Unfortunately, for a long time, Coast Guard has been seen as under the shadow of the Navy. They have not been given an independent role. Now, for the past few years, we've had Director Generals of the Coast Guard who are from the service. Unfortunately, we had a in-service DG pass away a few days ago. But since that, there has been renewed focus. And the Coast Guard's capacity has increased, though there is a lot of scope to do it further more. And I think the Coast Guard has moved proposals to increase their aerial capacity. They're the only force right now which don't have access to drone systems. I think they should be given drone and counter-drone capability. So there are thoughts on that, but it will require, again, resources to do it. Just a little thing on the Taiwan question. I mean, I really don't think India can intervene directly, but I think the most we can do is maybe have limited overflight or logistics support capacity if there are things going through. But I think what happens in Ladakh can show what's going to happen in Taiwan. If the Chinese really want to make a lot of peace in Ladakh, which they are trying to do now with the peace deal, they're trying to push back and solidify the uneasy peace, that could give an inclination that they want to open up another front. Because I don't think they would want two fronts open at the same time. On the question of soft power and India's influence operations, we have seen the role that central, like state-supported or country medias play. BBC, what Al Jazeera does. India can have a lot of role to play in the Indo-Pacific. India's media is acceptable. We have the language is English. We have a lot of diaspora there. But I have to say, unfortunately, the Indian media has failed the country in this. We have. I'm a bit ashamed to say this, but that is how it is. There is no Indian correspondent in any of the major Indo-Pacific capitals. We have no mainstream newspapers or channels investing in sending permanent reps there. In Delhi, we have representation from 50 to 60 countries at least, including from Japan, from Taiwan, from a lot of the Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, of course. We don't have any people there, and it's a failure on the Indian media's part because it is seen as a commercial venture. It's not making commercial sense to send that. I think if the government pushes that more, we should have our presence there, and I hope that happens in the future.
Thank you, Manu. That was very ably tackled, all of those questions. I just want to make one observation before I just open this up for another round, our last round of questions. Please keep your questions ready. So I want to say that I attended a conference in Vietnam a couple of months ago. And a participant made a very interesting observation, which he said that one of the things that we are seeing happen in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly he said when it comes to Southeast Asia, is that there is this confluence of thought that is happening and a sort of alignment, conceptual alignment, in that we agree on certain principles. And there was a time when there were just 2 or 3 countries who were willing to oppose China, but now principally, whether it's freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight, SLOC security, rules-based order, and I would say that that applies also to the Indian Ocean region, that there is this common narrative and a common sort of appreciation of each other's challenges. So I think that's what is driving Indo-Pacific synergy. The important thing is that we're going to inevitably work towards greater interoperability between navies, between coast guards. But the point, as some American colleagues pointed out, it's not that you're interoperable. The point is, are you willing to work as an interoperable unit? Meaning, are you willing to integrate and work together? Because even when it comes to the China challenge, unless you don't develop those habits of cooperation, of working together, all of that interoperability actually, is pointless. So on that, I will have to sort of agree that we are developing greater synergy. We are, Quad comes up. We do a lot of these exercises. The Malabar exercise happened. We are in a much better place than we used to earlier. But we are still not where we need to be. So that's one of the things that we need to bear in mind. Of course, the most important thing, as Manu has pointed out, and very correctly, is the capacity constraint. We've got to have our priorities right about where we need to be focused. And I think Admiral also mentioned Indian Ocean is perhaps where we're going to be primarily focused on, but we're also going to see what we can do in terms of pushing back China in the Pacific. But I'm going to open this up for another round of questions. Please keep your questions ready, because after that, then I'm not going to go to open up the floor again. Yeah.
Hello, sir. My name is Hirok Juri Kalita, currently pursuing Masters in International Relations at South Asian University. Sir, my question is for Manu, sir. Sir, as we historically we have seen that 50 to 60% of the defense budget allocation has been gone into the paying salaries and pensions of our armed forces. And to reduce the long-term pension liability, a few years back, the government has come up with the Agnipath scheme. So after the introduction of the Agnipath scheme, can you see any changes? Did it bolster our capacity building in Navy? Or how do the Navy and the maritime security has been impacted by after introduction of that scheme? So yes, sir, this is my whole question.
This is not a question that's directly related to maritime security, but I'm still going to ask Admiral Lanba to address this question in case you have any views on Agnipath, and does it in any way help us in building capability? But the second question, it would be you, yeah, please.
Am I audible? Yeah. Hi, I'm Sashwat. I'm a LAMP fellow. So my question is, India's foreign policy has traditionally emphasized strategic autonomy, avoiding alignment with any major power bloc. However, increasing, like the panel also talked about, increasing maritime engagement in the Indo-Pacific, especially through mechanisms like Quad, may challenge this stance. So how does India's engagement in the Indo-Pacific maritime security architecture sort of aligns with its broader strategic autonomy goal? And what are the sort of trade-offs we're looking at through this?
I understand you correctly. You're kind of pointing out that there is a bit of a contradiction between having self-autonomy or harping on your self-autonomy and then saying that you're going to be present in spaces that are extra-regional to you and perhaps somebody's backyard. Does that not impinge on their strategic autonomy? Is that the question that you're asking?
Also our strategic autonomy,
okay.
And also what are the trade-offs we are looking for?
Trade-offs that we are looking for. Again, this question would I would ask Admiral Lanba and you, Manu, to also look at. Yes.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, Admiral, sir. I'm Vaishnavi from University of Delhi. I'm pursuing Masters in Political Science. Sir, I had a question since the past year, there had been repeated questions about the impact of Western Quad, the I2U2, and its and shifting interests of USA and India towards I2U2. So, would that in any way impact the significant role of Quad in the IOR and their shifting interests from the IOR region to, since the countries, the four Quad members, have intrinsic economic ties with China? So, would that in any way, make them rethink about focusing on IOR or strengthening Western Quad? Thank you, sir.
This is a good question. And to this, I'm going to actually add a question which, Pratishari, you should answer about the Squad, which is the Philippines, the US, Japan, etc. I mean, those four countries. What does that in any way clash with the Quad's agenda? I mean, there's been some writing on this. Or do you think that they are complementary and they can, you have quadrilaterals of this sort, I2U2, Quad, Squad, etc. They can all work together. What's sort of your view on that? But there was another question that someone wanted to ask. Yes, please.
Thank you for the discussion. My name is Siddhant. I'm a research associate at NatStrat. And we've discussed a lot regarding Indian naval deployments in the SCS. So if and when that becomes more frequent, what kind of Chinese response can we expect? Is that something we are preparing for?
Excellent. I think Siddhant's asked the best question so far. How do you think China is going to respond to this? Is China going to take this very kindly to India's interventions? I wouldn't sort of call them interventions. Up until now, it's just engagement. But, if we do much more with Quad countries in the Western Pacific, it could border on intervention. So, and what would be China's response to this? Anyone else that has a question? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Sri Charan. I'm from CIPS, JNU. I'm PhD scholar. My question is regarding the resource crunch. If we really have such resource crunch with capital expenditure for the armed forces, why don't we bring out a scheme like how an NHA does, which rolls out treasury bonds to fund such expenditure? Because as we all know, not only Navy but also the Triforces, as long as Coast Guard, all of them has huge requirements which they can't fulfill with the current budgetary constraints. So, if we can allot the present capital expenditure which we are doing for expanded out the long timeline scheme of which are supported by treasury bonds and which are funded through public, like a retail investment, like people pitching out, like during emergencies, we collect national security bonds and all the other things. If we really have such a huge requirement, why don't we do that as of right now? Because that way, our capital requirements can be fulfilled with these interest payments, and it can be the payment for the capital equipment can be stretched out for a long time, 20, 30 years, even more than what we are capable right now through the regular funding.
Yeah, that's a radical suggestion. I haven't come across many examples of this. I don't know whether there's any countries that float bonds to support the military, but perhaps the panelists have a view on this. But there was a question from a naval officer. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Commander Nikhil. My question was, while we definitely it was to all the panelists. The question is, while we definitely need a stronger Navy and Coast Guard, there is no doubt about it, but all these developments historically depend on the kind of objective that we have. So historically, it has been protection of trade or influencing things ashore. So if the panelists could please enlighten on what are the Chinese stakes in Indian Ocean region vis-a-vis the Indian stakes in the South China Sea, because we have been talking about should India be in the South China Sea. So it would definitely depend on whether we have a stake there. So if the panelists could please enlighten on that.
Just on this question, I think this is a good question, and I'm going to add a couple of lines to what the Lieutenant Commander just pointed out. The fact is that China actually does have two different strategies for the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific. The Chinese are very aggressive. They call it full spectrum dominance in the South China Sea because it's their backyard. But in the Indian Ocean, they're not as aggressive. In the Indian Ocean, they have more of a strategy where they want to engage with regional partners, and they're not actually looking to operate in any other country's, territorial waters, EEZs. They're not extremely provocative. So, given that there is a difference in the way the Chinese operate, should India recognize that there's limits to how much we can push back China in the Indian Ocean? Because really, what they're doing is not illegal. It's not something that's barred in international law. So, I mean, this is just a point that the panelists could sort of consider and talk about. But I'm going to come to you. Is there another question?
My question is to Pratnashi. Japan, the country of Japan, at least from the last decade, has been trying to put some emphasis on the Indo-Pacific, ranging from Shinzo Abe's convergence of two seas speech in the Indian Parliament to Kishida's efforts he's trying to put the efforts in the Indo-Pacific, and the claims that U.S. Navy is spread all across the seas or oceans across the world. So, is Japan doing something which is commendable in the Indo-Pacific Sea, or all the attention which is required in the Indo-Pacific has been deflected towards Ukraine?
Pratnashri, the question is about Japan's Indo-Pacific strategy, and what should India make of it? And could the Japanese play a more robust role in the Indian Ocean? They are fairly involved in maritime operations on the Pacific side, but on the Indian Oceans. But I'm going to start with you, Admiral Lanba, if you can address some of these questions. Perhaps starting off with the Agnipath scheme.
Okay, it's a wide range of questions with a wide range of coverage. Okay, see, my view on the Agniveer scheme is we have security challenges on our land borders. We have a large standing army. And if you have security challenges, you need to have military capability, which needs to be there, up and standing to meet those challenges, whether they are on a land borders or on a maritime frontiers and a maritime interest. And for that, the nation needs to find the budget to support and build that military capability. Okay. If you are not willing to find the money and build that military capability, then you cut your coat and you talk accordingly with what capability you have. Okay. It is too early to tell what is going to be the fallout of the Agniveer scheme. The initial analysis which the Navy had done, this scheme was introduced post my retirement. So what I know of the initial analysis which the Navy had done with the scheme in its present form was that it doesn't work for us. We need technically trained manpower with experience to man platforms and operate the sophisticated equipment which is fitted on board. The real effect of the Agniveer scheme on operational capability will come out in 7 to 8 years' time, where majority of personnel manning platforms and in units across the three forces will be Agniveers. Okay. In my personal opinion, in the long run, at the moment, it's going to affect capability and capacity within the armed forces. But I'm quite sure that if the scheme continues in its present form, or there are going to be changes in the form, if they increase the number of retentions from 25% to over 50, I think the scheme will work. And I don't think so there will be effect on the operational capability. But in case it continues with the 25%, there may be an effect on operational capabilities across the board in all the three services. This is my personal opinion. Okay. Strategic autonomy and engagement and all that. Yes, there are always trade-offs in international relationships across the board. by being a member of the Quad or exercising with our partners in Quad and other nations, like you take the issue of strategic autonomy and what we have done during the Ukraine war and the purchase of Russian oil, just to our advantage. Okay. So in international relationships, it's very unlikely that India will become an alliance partner with any country. I don't foresee this happening with the present setup and the thought process which is there in the government of India for the past 78 years. So we'll exercise strategic autonomy. We will be one of the issues which was to provide an alternate issue to BRI, to have interconnection between India, the Middle East, through Israel and on to Europe through the Med. It's an alternate route which I think would be much cheaper to execute trade and exchange of goods, other than the BRI route which is going through from China through Central Asia going on to Europe. Okay. So these provide options to bring different countries together on platforms to take national interest issues forward in a more cohesive manner. India's deployment and China's response in the Indian Ocean region. See, Chinese have genuine security interest in the Indian Ocean region. A very large segment of their trade transits the slocks of the IOR. Whether it is the trade from China going to Europe or they are an energy deficient nation, a large segment of the oil is imported from the Middle East, which goes across the slocks. So they have security interest and vulnerabilities in the IOR. Okay. They are much more robust within the Western Pacific, within the first island chain and the second island chain, and they have a challenge there in the Western Pacific. Okay, they have to break out from the first island chain and the second island chain, where in India's case we have a free run from a coast across the IOR. And there are limited Chinese capabilities to have long-term deployments in the IOR. The only nation or the only navy which has a global presence and the ability to operate one facility which is there in Djibouti. Okay. So there are vulnerabilities and challenges in the IOR, and they are more robust in their own backyard in the Western Pacific because they have issues. And we also have vulnerabilities of our trade which is coming or flowing through the South China Sea. So we have to balance both what we can do and what we need to do in the future. This idea of having bonds to get over the resource crunch. No country has done this. I don't recollect, but I think there were some bonds floated in the Second World War in the United States, if I am correct. But ultimately, whether bonds or whatever you want, treasury bills, it is the government borrowing money, which will have to be returned sometime in the future. So if you want to fund the capacity and capability building, the government of India needs to find revenues in whatever ways in the form of raising revenues. And I don't think so this idea of having treasury bills or bonds is ever going to be taken up to fund defense budget, because ultimately the money has to be returned to the borrowers, that is you and me, who will be funding these treasury bonds. Japan, we need to be cognizant of their constitution. They've breached the barrier of the limitation of 1% of the GDP in building their self-defense forces in all the three elements. I think there is a greater focus on spending money and building military capabilities in the challenges they are facing, and they are now more proactive in operationals beyond their home waters in the Western Pacific. And I think as time goes by, you will see more and more presence of Japanese military capabilities in the larger Indo-Pacific. I think, Vijit, I have covered most of the points raised.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I know that was quite a menu of questions, but I'm going to now go to Pratnishri. Pratnishri, we want your responses on 3 questions, and short responses will be great. One, Japan, the Japan question, Japan in the Indo-Pacific, the Squad question, and the Chinese response to Indian operations in perhaps Western Pacific, South China Sea. 3 questions for you.
Yes, thank you. I'll be brief. Regarding Japan in the Indo-Pacific, Japan has actually been present across the Indo-Pacific region, in Southeast Asia in particular, and later on in the South Asian region as well, for many years, much before even China entered with its infrastructural investments. And Japan, I think, if we are to consider, for instance, their free and open Indo-Pacific vision, which was articulated by Abe, much before that, this principle has its roots in how Japan has civilizationally engaged with this region. So the FOIP is an articulation of the same. And so Japan has a lot of interests in the Indo-Pacific. It wants to maintain a free, prosperous, peaceful Indo-Pacific based on, with strong foundations on a rules-based order. And Japan has been doing a lot to maintain this, to show its support for this. 2 key ways have been, of course, through its developmental assistance programs, its ODI efforts, and also internally, gradually, changing their own constitution, the reforms process of their constitution from a pacifist one to a one that enables it to engage militarily more overtly with countries in the region. So the recent Official Securities Assistance Act, for instance, is a case in point. Coming to Squad, I don't think that Quad, Squad, and other such arrangements are contradictory to each other. I think they are complementary. The Squad, for instance, and even AUKUS, if that can be mentioned, these are all more military ones than the Quad, simply because these countries are aware that India will not engage in an open alliance or an overt military alliance grouping, and which is why the Quad particularly focuses more on functional cooperation aspects, which, while they have a strategic dimension, they are based more on issues like climate resilience, issues like cybersecurity, digitalization, and so on. They are not conflicting at all, whereas Quad and other partnerships are more of a military nature. Regarding India's interests in the South China Sea, of course, trade is an important aspect, and second is, from a geopolitical perspective, India's support for a rules-based order, freedom of navigation, and so on. India's, I think, presence in the South China Sea diplomatically and from a naval perspective are all in support of these 2 principles. Finally, if I could also respond to the question on strategic autonomy, I don't think that the strategic autonomy bit and India's engagements are contradictory in any way, because strategic autonomy does not mean strategic isolation. And as Minister Jaishankar has pointed out on several occasions, we are following a policy of multi-alignment. So in forming engagements and forging and cultivating engagements with countries, not only in our immediate neighborhood, but also the wider Indo-Pacific region, is part of our foreign policy. Thank you.
Shri, that was brief. Thank you. And now I'm going to come to Manu.
Few things on the defense budget and the Agnipath scheme. I think the Admiral has very beautifully captured the operational part of it. But yes, there is no doubt that the ballooning pensions budget, especially after OROP was implemented, was a big burden. So there's 2 options to it. Either you reduce the budget or you take it off the defense front and you show it as general government pensions. But yes, it is a factor. Operational things will be known in time, as Sir said. I think Ms. Basu addressed the strategic autonomy thing well. On the I2U2 and other formation Squad, why are we seeing all these multilateral smaller engagements? I think the bigger question there is because the UN is defunct today. The UNSC does not work. We need to change it. We need to have a whole new way of power which is not working. That's why we are seeing a much more of these things. I think we'll see more of them in the coming years for countries like India who don't have a voice in the UNSC permanently. Chinese response to India going to South China Sea, I think will be more alignments here. They'll make bases around us. They'll probably want to make a permanent base in the Sri Lankan. If we do go more into their territory, we're going to see that the string of pearls will become actually real. They will actually have bases. Right now, they only have influence, mostly. On the treasury funds thing, I think it'll be political suicide for the government if they go for that, because it'll show that you don't have money to, fund your forces, which is no votes for you. So I don't think they're going to do that, but they were trying some other innovative measures, which was one was a fund which HAL had proposed for buys of aerospace assets, that they could put their profits into a fund which could be used by the Air Force, could borrow from there to have sustainable order books. That is not taken well by the finance ministry yet. There's also a roll-on fund concept that every year's whatever money is left back, you put it into and roll it on. Even that has not taken because the bureaucratic process has still not happened. But yes, we do need some. The basic problem that industry sees is that there is no continuity of orders. So they can plan to make 100 helicopters a year, but they need to have a firm order. So it can't be you order 100 today and then after 10 years you order 1,000 more. And they need a sustainable plan for which funding is required. That has worked with the CDS coming in place and the new mechanism. Standardization is progressing better. They need continuity of orders, which is still not taking place. So that's, I think I've covered.
Thank you. Thanks, Amish. I think this has been an excellent discussion. I'm not going to try to summarize everything that the panelists have said, but I think there's been so many dimensions of maritime security that have come out here. I think it's important to recognize that firstly, among the many dimensions, force projection is certainly important. And we started out this conference, the logic was to talk a little bit about how India is projecting force. But really, this is also about capacity, as Manu rightly brings out, and the Admiral also highlighted. Unless you don't have the capacities, you are not going to really be able to make a difference, in the sense that what you do isn't going to be perceived right by countries in the neighborhood. And also, finally, I think that whatever you do, you have to have a sustainable presence. Something again that the Admiral sort of alluded to, which is that if you can't have consistent presence in any region, be it the Indian Ocean or the Western Indian Ocean and or the South China Sea, again, it's not going to appear on the adversary's radar. But lastly, I think importantly, this is going to be sort of final statement again that maritime security, I think, is more than just military security. There's so many other aspects to it. A lot of it has been highlighted, and a lot of capacities that we build is just not to make sure that you are a military presence in your waters or somebody else's waters. But the fact is that you try to do it so that you can reach out to your partners, you can engage with them, you can build prosperity, you can do development. And so one of the things that hasn't actually been mentioned, but blue economy is something that a lot of countries look at. So I think we've got to have a holistic sort of consideration of matter. But with this, I'm going to thank all of the three panelists. It's been an excellent discussion. There's so many questions and so ably handled by the panelists. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Pratnashri. Manu, can I request you to put your hands together for our panelists? This has been a wonderful discussion. We hope to see you again next time. Pratnashri, you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abhijit.
Thank you very much.